It was a hot day in 1933. A British man named Maurice Wilson was tightly holding the stick of his small open aircraft, watching the fuel tank run low. He had learned to fly only 2 months earlier, but his biggest problem wasn't the fuel running out at thousands of feet in the air. It was a long list of issues, including some British officers whom he had left behind in Bahrain, the certainty of being arrested if he landed in Iran, the waving waves of the Persian Gulf below, and the increasing likelihood that he wouldn't reach a safe place before the fuel ran out. But despite all of this, Wilson kept moving forward because the mission he had embarked on was far greater than these small problems. His mission was to crash this very plane into the world's highest mountain, Mount Everest. Welcome back once again to Mystery Pups Videos, viewers. Maurice Wilson was born on April 21, 1898, in West Yorkshire, into the home of a middle-class textile mill owner. If the Great War hadn't started when he was just 16, Maurice might have joined the family's textile business. But instead, following in the footsteps of his elder brother Victor, he joined the British Army on his 18th birthday. He was eager to get to the battlefield quickly. Eventually, in November 1917, Wilson was sent to France, where the Germans were attacking the British Army. By 7 a.m., the Germans had surrounded 3 out of 4 companies of Wilson's battalion. But Wilson, who was still in the remaining D Company, kept firing blindly at the Germans from a machine gun post. Wilson was very stubborn, the kind of stubbornness that could even get someone killed, but he survived the war without injury. He was the last surviving soldier of his company who wasn't captured. For his bravery, he was awarded the Military Cross, as his actions had stopped the German attack. However, just a few months after receiving this honor, Wilson was sent back to the front line in June. On July 19, 1918, Wilson was advancing with a small team when a German machine gunner spotted them and opened fire. Wilson was shot in the back and left arm, but he survived. This wound caused pain and weakness in his arm that would haunt him for the rest of his life. For the next several months, Wilson remained admitted to the hospital due to his injuries. Afterward, he was sent to a reserve battalion, but perhaps misfortune was written in his fate. As soon as he arrived there, he caught the influenza that was rapidly spreading across the world at that time. This illness once again confined him to a hospital bed, and it was there on that very bed that World War I came to an end. During his treatment, Wilson wrote a letter to the War Ministry requesting a pension for his injuries, but the ministry rejected this request. According to their army doctors, his wounds weren't serious enough to merit financial compensation. This rejection deeply hurt Wilson, and it sparked a sense of rebellion in his heart against the government system. That resentment stayed with him until 1919, when he was demobilized and sent back home to Bradford. Wilson now faced the same question that thousands of other World War I soldiers were asking. We made so many sacrifices, suffered wounds, but the reward was not worth it. Wilson was now broken from within, and he wanted to do something great with his life. For the next 10 years, he wandered around the world restlessly. During this time, he got married twice, switched through several businesses, but by 1932, the peace he was searching for was still nowhere to be found. On top of that, the wounds from the war continued to cause him constant pain. His health was deteriorating day by day. It was during this time that Wilson met a spiritual man who told him that if he fasted for a few days, all his problems would go away. Wilson actually fasted for several weeks and spent his time in prayer. A few months later, he returned to society not just physically healthy, but also completely freed from depression and illness. His belief grew even stronger. Any problem in the world could be solved through fasting and prayer. Wilson now began taking on new challenges. He claimed that through the power of fasting, he would accomplish things the world had never seen before. Around this time, one day he came across a newspaper article. It was about the 1924 British Mount Everest expedition. In that mission, George Mallory and Andrew Irvine had tried to reach the summit of the world's tallest mountain, Mount Everest, but both disappeared somewhere along the way. Wilson had now found a purpose. He became determined to conquer Mount Everest alone, relying solely on fasting and prayer. But the problem was, how would he climb Mount Everest? Wilson knew that Everest expeditions cost a lot of money, required taking multiple carriers, and most importantly, needed extensive training. But he was trying to bypass all those requirements and was looking for a shortcut. In 1932, the Houston expedition was making headlines. This mission would send an aircraft over Mount Everest for the first time and take photographs from above. It's worth noting that until that time, no one had ever reached the summit of Mount Everest. The world was eager to see the peak of this mountain. It was then that a fantastical idea took root in Wilson's mind. He thought he would join the expedition, and when the plane flew over Everest, he would jump down using a parachute, thus becoming the first person in the world to reach the summit of Everest. Just a few weeks later, he dismissed this idea as impossible. But then came an idea even more dangerous than the last one. Yes, Wilson had completely gone mad. He made a plan that he would buy his own aircraft and crash land it in the snow at a height of 15,000 feet on Mount Everest. That way, most of the distance would be covered by air, and the rest he would cover alone with the help of fasting and prayer. Here, it's important to understand one thing. Morris Wilson had neither mountaineering experience nor flying experience. He practiced a little bit of mountain climbing, but never attempted to learn technical mountaineering. After that, he bought a 3-year-old de Havilland Gypsy Moth aircraft, which was once part of a flying circus. It was a wooden, 2-seater, open-cabin biplane, quite popular in recreational aero clubs of that era. He had Everest painted on the side of the aircraft, a self-made name, perhaps resembling Mount Everest. During pilot training, his instructor clearly told him that he would never even make it to India. But Wilson stuck to his obsession. During this time, the British Air Ministry found out about his mission, and they did not want Wilson to carry out any sort of madness. When the British Air Ministry informed the Nepalese authorities about Wilson's plan, they denied him permission to enter Nepalese airspace. This was bad news, as Wilson had planned to reach Everest through Nepal. But he was ready to go to any length to fulfill his mission. He called the media to Stag Lane Aerodrome Airfield in London and tore up the British Air Ministry's telegram in front of everyone. Without caring about any permissions, he took off. Everest, loaded with extra fuel drums, could travel up to 750 miles. Wilson made refueling stops in the German city of Freiburg, in Marseille, France, in Pisa, and Naples in Italy, and in Sicily. It was a beautiful and mostly problem-free journey until he crossed the Mediterranean. In Tunisia, the police arrested him, but he was released soon after. Also, in Tunis, he mistakenly filled his fuel tank with fuel that had water mixed in it. But luckily, he managed to land safely in the city of Gabs. There, he refueled properly and then headed toward Egypt via Tripoli, Benghazi, Tobruk, and Alexandria. When he reached Cairo, he received bad news. The permit to fly over Iran, which he had been assured would be waiting for him in Cairo, was nowhere to be found. He spent the entire day going from one British officer to another, trying to get the permit. But perhaps the British had deliberately blocked it. Instead of wasting more time in bureaucratic circles, Wilson flew straight to Baghdad. Now Iran stood in his way, but he didn't have permission to land there. So he had to find a new route. The problem was, he didn't even have a good, detailed map. In Baghdad, he landed and bought a children's school atlas from the market and marked his route on it, then set off for Bahrain. Meanwhile, the British officers had begun thinking one step ahead of Wilson. They had already sent telegrams to his next destination. When Wilson arrived Bahrain, a British officer summoned him to his office. The officer made it clear, there are no airstrips on the path ahead for your small plane except one place in Iran, and if you land there without a permit, you will be arrested immediately. The officer told Wilson he could refuel his plane in Bahrain, but only on the condition that he would head straight back to London. Wilson agreed to this. But when he took off, instead of turning toward London, he turned in the exact opposite direction east, toward India. Flying along the southern edge of the Persian Gulf, he managed to avoid Iran. In secret, Wilson had spotted a new airstrip near Iran on a map in the British officer's office. That airstrip was in Gwadar, which at the time was part of India. After 9.5 hours, when the fuel gauge of his aircraft was nearly at zero, Wilson safely landed on the Gwadar airstrip. Wilson continued his journey through British India, where a fresh wave of media excitement was waiting for him. He traveled across India, celebrating his success, and eventually reached the city of Purnia in northeast India, which was located right near the Nepal border. But the long arm of the British government caught up with him once again. At the local airstrip in Purnia, the police were already waiting. They seized Everest and placed Wilson under security surveillance. The British government reminded him once again that, despite having a plane, he did not have permission to fly over Nepal. Now Wilson was truly stuck. Forget about the permit, he couldn't even fly his plane anymore because it had been confiscated. He found himself caught between the British government and his dwindling funds. Finally, in July 1933, he was forced to sell Everest. His plan to crash land the plane on Mount Everest was now completely ruined, but his obsession with climbing Everest still wasn't over. He spent the winter in Darjeeling, India fasting, praying, and trying to get a permit to enter Tibet so that he could attempt to climb Everest from the Tibetan side. But every effort failed. Eventually, he began secretly planning to climb Everest. On March 21, 1934, Wilson, disguised in monk's robes, began his journey on foot. He crossed Sikkim and entered Tibet. After a couple of attempts, he had to return from Everest's base camp due to breathing difficulties and lack of proper training. His health was deteriorating. But in May 1934, Wilson set off again toward Everest, this time with two companions. These two men were experienced climbers, and thanks to that, they reached Camp 3 within just 3 days. Wilson left the companions at Camp 3 and moved ahead alone. They pleaded with him not to continue, but he didn't listen to a single word. This was the same stubbornness that could kill a man. Wilson gave his companions one final instruction: if he didn't return within 2 weeks, assume he was dead. But they didn't just wait 2 weeks, they waited a whole month. When Wilson didn't come back to Camp 3, they finally descended from Everest. At the end of July, they reached India and announced the news of Wilson's death. Another English mountaineer had fallen prey to the deadly world of Everest. A year later, in 1935, Eric Shipton's Everest expedition discovered Wilson's body. It was lying between Mount Everest and the base of the North Colonel Pass, alongside his backpack, diary, and a torn tent. The last entry in his diary was from May 31, 1934, and it read, "Heading out again, what a beautiful day. Hopefully, you'll like and share this video from Mystery Hub. Just as much, see you in the next amazing video."